Basically, our mission is to educate people about the impacts of fracking that you're not going to hear on the commercials on television, you're not going to hear in the news reports on television, you're not going to hear from the gas industry. That's just the way it is. And the reality is, you're probably not going to hear it too much from studies that are done in most universities. Most universities are funded by gas industry studies. The good news is that there are some nonprofits that are coming out with studies and some grassroots groups that are pulling together and coming together and producing really valuable reports and information. But the real challenge is getting that to people. There's two reports I want to talk about tonight. One was just released on Tuesday from Penn Environment. And Penn Environment is a citizens advocacy group for the environment. The other group is the Fort Worth Neighborhood League, and it is a group of people, property owners, business owners, parents, out of Fort Worth, Texas. And anybody who's done any reading knows Fort Worth, Texas is the first drilling capital of the world, and then Pennsylvania is the next drilling capital of the world as far as drilling in the United States. And they came out with a report about drilling near schools. This photograph that was on the handout that was passed out to you, which is the well flaring, and you can see clearly the playground at Summit Elementary School. When I first saw this film, or this picture, it was jarring to me. I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe that they're doing this. And I think the thing that the question that the Penn Environment study brings out is, should an industrial process such as fracking be done next to schools? That's the question. And this study talks about what an intense, polluting industrial activity it is. The machinery that's involved, powered by diesel fuel, trucks hauling millions of gallons of water coming in and out of the site with chemical solutions, waste storage ponds, and all the infrastructure that goes along with it, the compressor stations, the gas processing plants, and the pipelines. Should this be happening near schools? Communities typically put industrial activities far away from vulnerable populations. Hospitals, daycare centers, schools. You know, that's what typically happens. But what we're seeing happen is fracking now is happening in close proximity to places that hold vulnerable populations. What we're here about tonight is about schools. We have a problem now because they're at Summit Elementary, they're in other schools in Butler County. But there's a projection of 60,000 wells being in Pennsylvania on 15,000 well pads. So that means more wells near schools. And in Butler County, between 2005 and 2010, there were 157 well permits. Just in 2 years, from 2011 to 2013, 373. You know, and this year alone, 124. So you can see the trajectory of what's happening with the permitting and the well drilling. So Penn Environment study was in a 5-state region. Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia was part of that. And they were looking at the number of wells that were within half a mile, 1 mile, and a 2-mile radius from daycare facilities, schools, and hospitals. And there are more than 400 wells within a mile of daycare centers in this 5-state region. And that's daycare centers and schools and hospitals, excuse me. Then it breaks it down, 190 close to daycare facilities, 223 next to schools, and 5 next to hospitals. This is a chart that they show, and sometimes charts just show the background circle is 2 miles, the red circle is 1 mile, and then the brown circle is within a half a mile. In Pennsylvania, there's been a 60% increase in wells within a mile of daycare centers. just since 2010. 6 different Pennsylvania school districts now have 5 or more fracking permits within a half a mile of schools, half a mile radius of schools. And Summit Elementary is one of those schools. The Butler School District is one of them. The other thing that Rainey mentioned that is really of concern, because these operate 24/7, natural gas compressor stations. There are 31 daycare facilities within a mile and 28 schools and 1 hospital. So I think we're seeing a trend here. This is the Dreyer well. Those of you who live in Summit know this picture. It is a half a mile from Summit Elementary. It's not the one that's closest to Summit Elementary, but the Penn Environment Report talks about what can directly impact children. And there's 4 things: accidents, three things: accidents, water contamination, and air pollution. But accidents, you can look at a couple different categories. I pondered about doing this because this is not meant to terrorize people about the possibilities, but it's meant to be forthcoming and honest about what are the accidents that can happen. Fires can occur from well blowouts. Well site fires are an immediate safety threat to anybody nearby. And so, you have a well half a mile from a school. That's extremely dangerous situation. Blowouts are uncontrolled release of gas, oil, or water from a well. It has happened in Pennsylvania. This happened in February 23rd, 2010. This is a fire in Avella, Washington County, and it occurred when they were transferring water used in fracking to the gas storage tanks, and there were 3 workers injured at that. This is a fire that happened just in July, this past July, in West Virginia. There was an explosion by the storage tanks. 2 people died in this explosion. 4 were taken to the burn unit. And this one was just on the 21st of September. And this was a gas processing plant explosion in West Virginia. The residents had to be evacuated. In March 2012, there was a compressor station fire in Susquehanna County. In April 2010 in Hopewell Township, Washington County, there was a fire in a pit with waste fluids, and the flames were 100 feet high. These are the kind of things that is very disturbing to think of the possibilities. Now, you may feel a little better about this, but well blowouts happen in 1 in 1,000 wells. But what if it's the well that's closest to your school or to your home? And actually, within the last couple of years, there have been a number in this Pennsylvania and West Virginia area. The other thing that is of concern regarding accidents is the amount of truck traffic that happens around well sites. There's an estimate of 700 truck trips that happen just to bring in the water, take out the waste. And these are going down rural roads that are windy. And the chance for accidents, increased likelihood of accidents on narrow roads. There was actually a 3-year-old child killed in an automobile accident a couple of weeks ago in Washington County. It's interesting you don't hear much of this on the news. In fact, that West Virginia fire had a 2-second, on KDK, had a 2-second report. That's it. Raina talked a little bit about water concerns, and probably many of you know what the fluids contain. Although it's 84% water and 15% sand, there's 1% chemical additives, and we don't even know what most of those chemicals are. But for one well, which has 3 to 5 million gallons of water that are part of the fracking fluid, that amounts to 250,000 pounds of chemicals. It's a lot of chemicals. And if you look at in it. Oh, a light, thank you. A little better light. I'm in the dark. Oh my God. I hope that's not. It is literal. I hope it's not figurative too. So, you know, it's a lot of chemicals, and so that's part of what we get very concerned about. The sources of groundwater contamination that can go into the ground and pollute water wells and springs. Surface contamination, the spills that are caused by wastewater impoundment failures. The impoundments are where they store either the fresh water that they're going to use for fracking, but they're also use that for the flowback fluids that come back with the chemicals in it, and that's where those chemicals are stored, that water with the chemicals in it. Sloppy handling of dangerous substances, faulty well construction, and abandoned well shafts, and compromised well casings. Tony Ingraffia, who is one of the engineers who developed hydraulic fracturing, says 7% of well casings fail immediately. So you talk about 1 in 14 fail immediately. They're going to be compromised, which means there's danger of water contamination. And he says all of them will eventually fail over time, just because steel deteriorates and cement deteriorates. There's a range of health impacts from the water problems, ranging from headaches, eye irritation, respiratory problems, nosebleeds, nausea, to more acute illnesses, cancer, asthma, problems with liver, kidney, and central nervous system, and the long-term exposure of these contaminants is a serious public health situation. The Fort Worth study, I'm just going to talk a little bit about this because this happened in Fort Worth. The League of Neighborhoods hired scientists and experts who were experts in drilling emissions and pipeline issues, and they wanted them to give a report to parents and school board members so they would know what protective measures to take. Just want to go over a couple of the findings. And I had never heard this one. They found high levels of carbon disulfide when they looked at the wells around schools. These are just looking at wells around schools. And this chemical is known to create neurological, cardiovascular, behavioral, and psychotic abnormalities. And it builds up in the system over time, and it travels over 2 miles from the source of the carbon disulfide. They said, my gosh, there's more than just the wellhead that's a source of toxins in the air, because this was a study that was just done of the air. There's a steady flow of toxins from the wellheads, the tank batteries, the compressor stations, the processing sites. Benzene, carbon tetrachloride were 2 of the hazardous air pollutants, and benzene, which we know is a carcinogen, is 6 times more likely to cause cancer in children. Diesel exhaust, gases vented from wells, condensers and waste ponds, particulate pollution can cause irreversible damage to the lungs of children. The flaring is particularly up, and this is what Fort Worth came up with. It's a particular problem with air pollution for children. Also, flowback water storage ponds could be a major source. I didn't even think this was a major source, but they're talking about this being a major source of hazardous air pollution. And the reason children are most vulnerable is because their respiratory systems, their immune systems, their nervous systems are still developing. And they're more susceptible to the damage by these toxic chemicals. And they're also more likely to play outside than we as adults are. So they are being exposed to the contaminants in the air. And they also have less ability to detoxify these dangerous chemicals compared to adults. And they're more likely to, because they're younger, they're more likely to have a long sustained exposure to these chemicals. And these long exposures will not produce symptoms right away. So these are all things they presented to the parents and the homeowners and the business people in the area. Short-term exposure to the hazardous pollutants in the air. You have difficulty breathing, wheezing, watery, itchy eyes, rashes, headaches. High exposures can also cause nausea, lack of coordination, more serious and much more serious impacts. And these are good things for people to be aware of, to tell people who are by these um, wells and processing plants and compressor stations. If your child is having these symptoms or nosebleeds, see a medical person right away. This probably was pretty astounding, what they found out at Fort Worth, and I hadn't heard of one of these. They said, you know, the cumulative effect of kids being in this toxic soup is not known. All these chemicals that they're exposed to, we don't know when they're all, it's carbon disulfide, but it's also benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, you know, there's just so many different chemicals. But this second one was a new one for me. They were trying to find out from the industry, as well as from the schools, what is the pipeline impact radii? That's the zone or area around the pipelines which could be impacted if there's an explosion. What's the distance that kids need to be away from pipelines? Nobody knew the answer to that. And they were astounded that there was no specific information about that. The troubling discoveries that this report came up with is there's little information available to elected officials, either locally or at the state level. And the information that they are getting is coming from the operators, which means from the gas industry. And there's a complete relegation of responsibility, both by Fort Worth, the city. You could say Butler as a city, or you could say, you know, the township that you're in, and the state to allow an industry to conduct operations at their own discretion with very little oversight. They keep telling you about, well, DEP is inspecting them. They are so understaffed that there is no way that there is a constant oversight of these sites. And many of you are familiar with Act 13, which took away a local community's right to zone for this. In other words, this drilling for unconventional gas drilling can happen in any zone. Somebody told me that Summit Elementary is actually...
Summit Well is a residential zone.
Yeah, that Summit Elementary is in a residential zone. So even though this is being contested by people actually in Southwest Pennsylvania, South Fayette, Peters Township, they are, Cecil Township, they challenged Act 13, went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, since last October, has not delivered a decision on this, whether to give the right back to local communities. If you're already living in a frac zone, which most of us are here, that the federal government should make sure that the acts that were passed to protect people in the past, which this industry got exempt from back in 2005, Safe Drinking Water Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and et cetera. They don't have to abide by these because they got an exemption. It's called the Halliburton loophole. So their recommendation is we should enact those on the federal level again. We should deny the exemptions. The XTO who's doing the well drilling by Summit Elementary, is XTO the one that's trying to get in at Slippery Rock? At Moraine Elementary, yes?
Yes.
Okay, we have some real concerns about XTO. There's been 230 violations in Pennsylvania. 43 of those violations were improperly cemented or failed casings. That's a real problem for the water. There were 12 violations in Butler County, 7 occurring in 2003, which involved the mishandling of toxic waste in Forward and Summit Townships. And the Attorney General for Pennsylvania, Kathleen Kane, has filed criminal charges against XTO for illegally discharging 57,000 gallons of toxic wastewater in Penn Township, Lake Homing County. So there's some concerns about who the driller is here. And I know after hearing Raina and after hearing these reports, I mean, your natural tendency is probably to just want to put your head in the sand and say, I just can't deal with this. This is too much. And there are times I feel that way. But I would like you to consider this, that a threat without a plan will make you feel helpless, extremely anxious. And if you try to go this alone, if you try to just stay, you and your family, dealing with this, it does become unbearable. But being part of a group that is working a plan helps bring some calmness and gives us courage to do something.